Hi, I'm Larry Puckett, the DCC Guy. Today on the DCC Guy, we're going to take a look at crossovers because I've gotten, over the last couple of years, several requests from people to do a crossover video, and most recently someone wanting to know how they could install one without creating a short. So we're going to take a look at both sides of the question. We're going to look at the wiring involved, how you can do this without creating any shorts on your layout, and then secondly, how do you put together a crossover and get it ready to install on your layout. One other thing I want to point out is the videos that I did last week on the photo detection circuit for signaling on your model railroad. The photographs and the drawing of the circuit are now available on my personal website, larrypuckett.wordpress.com. So go ahead, take a look, download those, and see if it's something that you want to tackle. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started with the video. But first, I want to ask you to support the channel here by subscribing to it. All you have to do is hit that little red subscribe button, and when the little bell comes up, click on it and click all. Thanks now. Okay, let's go ahead and move over to the Piedmont Southern layout, and we'll take a look at a crossover that's already been installed there, and I'll go over some of the tips I have on wiring the layout for general operation and also for installing crossovers, both single and double crossovers. You know, it's all pretty much the same. Once you get it wired right and installed, you won't have any problems at all with short circuits. So let's go ahead and move over there to the layout. Okay, here we are on a section of the Piedmont Southern where I've installed a crossover, as you can see here. And if you look close, you can see that we have the 2 inches between the two parallel tracks. Now, that is typical for HO. Most HO layouts and standard books will tell you that 2 inches between the rails is proper for straight parallel tracks. They get wider as you get into curves, but for parallel like this, you want to be at 2 inches. Now, what about wiring? Because that's very important for this method. Because there's 2 ways that you could wire these two parallel tracks. One way would be to wire them so that this rail and this rail are opposite polarity, and that one are opposite polarity. And that is what it would look like if you had a big loop at the end that was just continuous track. But that is the worst way to do it as far as I'm concerned. What you want this rail here, the back rail, and the back rail here to be the same polarity. Same thing here. You want this rail and this rail to be the same polarity. Because as I'm going to show you, that's going to greatly simplify all of your crossover installations and a lot of other things on your model railroad. Okay, so why is it so important then that this rail and this rail be the same polarity, this rail and this rail be the same polarity? Well, watch. Okay, if we follow the rails, if we start here on this rail and follow it through the crossover, it's going to come through the frog, and it's going to go through here, and it's going to connect back to this rail on this side. So if this one and this one are the same polarity, you're not going to have any shorts coming through this crossover. The same thing up here. Okay? If this rail and this rail are the same polarity, as you come through the crossover, follow the rail, you can see you go to the same polarity. This and this would be the same polarity. So you can't get any shorts here. The only way you're going to get a short is if you get your frogs set up out of phase. And that's just something you set that up using. You can either use a dual frog juicer to control these two frogs, or you could use the contacts on a switch machine, such as a Tortoise or the Cobalt Digital, one of those, to be able to control your polarity of your frog here. And when you're setting things up, it's simply a trial and error method to make sure that you get these set up properly. And take a look at my videos on wiring frogs and on installing turnouts and that kind of thing, because I do cover that in those videos. Okay, so that's why it is so easy to get this installed without any shorts. You have to have your polarity of this rail and this rail the same, this rail and this rail the same, and then you don't have to worry about anything. You just make your soldered connections all the way through, here, here, here and here, also here and here, and here and here, to give power to the entire frog from the rails here and here, which are powered, and that's going to power you all the way through here because this rail is continuous, this rail is continuous. So you have soldered connections out here on this end and this end of the turnout, on this end and on this end of the turnout, and that's going to provide power to your entire crossover. So you don't have to worry about powering the turnout itself, just the individual frogs and getting those power routed so that they're the correct polarity. Okay, let's go ahead and go back to the workbench and take a look at how do you go about creating this crossover itself so that you can just drop it in the same way you would with installing a microengineering turnout. Okay, I've zoomed in here on the bench top and we're going to take a look at how you put together a crossover. So this is a crossover right here that's already put together, ready to be installed on the layout. And as you can see, I've already added my droppers or feeders for the frog itself. And I showed how to do this in previous videos, and I'll put links to those here above me and at the end of the video, because there's about 4 different videos that I did on installing turnouts. I did videos installing, I believe, these turnouts, Pico turnouts. I took a look at how to convert your turnouts to being DCC friendly, and I'm not going to really go into a full installation. I'm going to show you how to make these and then just let you take a look at these other videos, because there's really no difference between installing a crossover like this, which is 2 turnouts, and a single turnout, which I've already covered in previous videos. Specifically, I covered how to install this microengineering turnout back in video 177. So take a look at that specifically. I covered Pico turnouts in video 142. And I'll give you some tips on how you can do this with Pico. So first thing I want to point out is that there are a couple of different ways that you can do this. Now, if I were to take, and I'm going to move this out of the way, if I were to take 2 turnouts and set them up back to back like so, which is what you might think you'd want to do. If you measure that, you will find that center to center, you're at almost 2.5 inches here across the 2 turnouts. Now typically for HO scale, you want to be at 2 inches center to center between your rails. So how do you go about doing this without cutting everything up? Well, let me show you something very interesting. With these microengineering turnouts, and let me zoom in just a bit. With these microengineering turnouts, the way they are built, they can be slid together or apart. So watch this. So you can see I'm able to just slide these together or apart in order to build a crossover. Okay, so let me show you that here. So here's the individual frog rail. I can just grip that and give it a pull, and I can pull this one all the way out, and on the opposing side I can pull this one all the way out once I get it started. There we go. And then this rail and this rail can be slid in their place. So that's how you're able to get these set up so they just kind of slide into one another. And I'll show you how that goes in just a minute. Now, one thing you do have to be aware of with this turnout, you of course are going to have to remove some of the ties on each side because they're not going to fit unless you do that. So basically there are a total of 11 ties that are in here. So I just remove the first 5 from this one, and I'll take the first 6 out of this one, and then we'll be able to slide them together like that. But before we get started with tearing this one apart and putting it together to make a crossover like this one, I want to give you some tips on other types of turnouts, because To be honest with you, I've always made mine using microengineering because of their ability to do this here, so that you can just pull them apart and slide them together again. Makes it very, very simple. The thing that you have to be aware of is microengineering turnouts come DCC friendly. Okay, they are bonded. There's a jumper right here between the running rails and the closure rails here. So these are always the same polarity, and these are always the same polarity. And then here at the frog, there is a little nib between the frog itself and the ends of these rails. So there's no continuity to the frog. Same thing on the frog rails. There's a couple of little spacers in here, so these are independent from the frog and also from the closure rails. Consequently, these have no power at all. The only way that you power these is by connecting them to live rails, and that works fine, as I'll show you here in a minute. Now, with other types of turnouts, as long as they're DCC friendly, it shouldn't be a problem. When you run into things like the Pico ones, the Pico Electro frogs, they are joined together here at the on the frog rails. So that's why in my video on converting turnouts to DCC friendly capability or status or whatever, I always tell you to make that cut here, because it isolates the frog rails and allows you to do things like this. So you're able to make that connection. So be aware of that, and take a look back at my video on turnouts where I explain how they are or are not DCC friendly and whether or not they're connected here and powered through their frog. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started with pulling this apart and putting it back together again. So I'm going to move this one out of the way, and then I'm just going to take a pair of needle nose pliers and give this a good straight pull out, just like that. And then I'm going to do the same thing on this one. Like that. So those guys are out of there. So now we'll be able to overlap them without any problems once we get these ties cut out. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so what we have to do now is cut out the 5 ties here, or the 6, depending on which one of these two it is. And for that, I do not recommend using a knife blade like this or an X-Acto knife, because the plastic that they use, and this is for the microengineering, I don't recommend doing it for any of them. But what we're going to have to do is remove this connection between these ties here, because these have to be slid out, and so you've got to cut through. So I'm going to do the first 5 here. What I'm going to use are my Xuron rail cutters, and they will do a nice square cut. So I'm just going to start by right here cutting off the ends of these ties so that I can get back in here. And then, so that's the first 2 here. And then I'm going to go ahead and cut 3 more, like that. And we'll go in and do one here and one here. Okay, so that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, the next thing you want to do is flip it over and go back 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and cut through the webbing here. And that's going to separate it from, see if I can get this here, and that's going to separate it from the rear. Okay, and then once that's done, it's free, and you can just slide those ties off like that. And then finally, I'm going to go through here and square them all up now again using my rail nippers, like so. And then I've got a nail file that I got from my wife. I asked her for it, by the way. And then you just square off the ends of those ties that you just cut. Give them another file here to smooth them down. And then once you put these together and paint the ties and the rails after you've installed them on the layout, you won't even notice it at all. It looks just like it was built that way. So I'll go ahead and do the next one, and then we'll go ahead and put it together. Okay, so at this point then, all you have to do is line these up, slide the opposing rails underneath of the spike heads where you pulled out the other rails, and keep sliding them in slowly. You don't want to break those ties. Matter of fact, lay them on a nice flat surface, and that way they're going to slide in much easier. There. There, it started to go in. The hard part is just getting these started. Once they're started, they're going to slide in real easy, he said. I forgot to cut these ties on this side. Okay, let me go ahead and we'll knock these off here so that they'll fit in here properly. Get these snipped off. It's a lot easier than using trying to use that number 17 blade, and a heck of a lot less dangerous. Okay, so let's see if they'll just slide together now. So you just kind of wiggle them a little bit, and they will slide right on into position, unless you run into another. Nope, there they go. So there it is, all done. It's laid out, and as I showed you earlier on the other one, we're looking at 2 inches between the two rails, because these will be connected to the parallel rails. Okay, so that's all there is to it. Now, the great thing about this is power is continuous through this rail and through this one. So even though we've pulled out these guys, you've still got a complete connection on either side here. So you don't have to worry about attaching any feeders to the rails at all. All you have to do is connect all the ends of the free ends here of the turnouts to live rails, to powered rails, and you'll have power to the entire turnout. You're not going to have to put any feeders on here except the droppers that I've showed you about before for power routing the frog itself. Okay, at this point then, all you have to do is install this, like I said, just like you would the microengineering turnouts as I showed you back in video 177. So go ahead, give a look at that, and you should be good to go on that one. Well, that's a wrap for today's video. I hope I've given you the tips that you need in order to install crossovers on your layout and get them in so that they won't create any problems for you, either with shorts or derailments or anything, because it's a very straightforward procedure once you know the secrets that I've just shared with you. So have a great weekend. We'll see you here next week with another video from the DCC Guide. Bye now.